last time we were talking about God's attribute of divine eternity. We started the discussion on divine eternity. And what we talked about was we looked at the scriptural data concerning this property of being eternal. And what we did was we saw that Scripture affirms that God is without beginning, He's without end. But Scripture is underdeterminative. It doesn't tell us exactly what we should think about God's relationship to time, right? We can understand that God is without beginning, He's without end, but how does God relate to the world? And so we looked at two different possibilities. God is either temporal, and on the one hand, which means He's within time, or He's timeless, which means that He's outside of time. And so this is a question that Scripture doesn't answer for us. And so what we want to do today is look at some philosophical arguments for and against temporality or timelessness. God's being either a temporal being existing within time, or God's being a timeless being existing outside of time. But before we begin, I wanted to ask if there's any other questions about this distinction between God's being temporal or God's being timeless. Do you have any questions there?
And the temporal part, is there aging?
For God, I wouldn't say that there is like physical aging, like how we get wrinkles and that kind of thing, because He's not a physical being. He's an immaterial being, and so He doesn't have physical like we have with our skin and aging in that sense.
That's why I would put time with that, meaning maybe God exists outside of time
because He doesn't age.
And then we have Elijah, Moses, and all of them. Mm-hmm. Are they aging? Mm-hmm. Or are they in a place where there is no time?
Right.
Therefore, they don't age.
Right. That's an interesting question. The question is, so if they are not aging, does that mean that they are outside of time? Which, in a sense, it could be. That could be the case. Like when you say that there's no aging, you could mean that there's no changing at all. So if there is no changing, then I would say that you do exist timelessly. If you're not changing at all, but not changing doesn't necessarily mean that you're not aging. So you could be, not aging doesn't necessarily mean that you're not changing. So if God doesn't age, He could still exist within time. And He just would have, for instance, He would be in the present moment. He would remember things that happened in the past. He would know things that would happen in the future, but He still wouldn't age. And so I think that just because God doesn't age doesn't necessarily mean that He's timeless. So I think the two can coexist. He could be he wouldn't necessarily age like we age as far as our skin cells depleting and that kind of thing, but he would be in time as far as knowing that this is the present moment, the past has gone away, the future is yet to be, and so it seems like He could be ageless, not aging, but He could also be within time. Do we have any other questions on this distinction between God's being in time and being outside of time? So we'll talk more about it today, and hopefully it's going to make a little more sense because we're going to get really, really deep into it. And today's classes, you're going to have to put your thinking cap on for today. It's going to be really, really interesting. So let's turn now to an argument for God's being timeless. One of the strongest arguments to have been offered for God's being timeless is the argument from the incompleteness of temporal life. The argument from the incompleteness of temporal life. Temporal existence, like our existence, is terribly incomplete in that you do not yet have your future. It's merely potential. And you no longer have the past. That is over and done with. All you have is the present in temporal existence. All you have is the present moment. Like we're here standing here right now, all we have is this present moment, right? And so what this says is that this is incompatible with God. So temporal existence is a sort of fleeting existence where you do not have yet the fullness of your entire life all at once. You just have this very brief momentary slice of life, one slice at a time. The argument here is that this kind of incomplete existence, where we just have this present moment, is incompatible with the existence of a most perfect being, which is what God is. A most perfect being should have his whole life all at once, so to speak. This is the argument. He should have all of his life, not just the present moment, the present slice here today. He should have all of it at once. This is the argument. He should never lose his past or have a future that is yet to be gained. He should have all of his life at once. And we can kind of see this. Time has a sort of a way of gnawing away at life and making it terribly incomplete and evanescent. For those that have lost loved ones, what you have of these people are your memories, right? You don't have them here with you. What you have are the memories of them, your memories of what they did in your life. And you might have pictures, you might have videos, but you don't have them here with you, right? And so the moments that you share with them are gone. And this sort of life, the argument goes, is incompatible with the existence of a most perfect being, which ought to have the fullness of life altogether, all at once, and therefore to be outside of time altogether. Babe, I have a kolache in there for you if you want that. So to sum up, so this argument is basically that a most perfect being should have all of his life before him at once. He shouldn't just live in a present time, a present moment. He should have all of it at once, because that's what a most perfect being should have. He should have all of his life all at once. And so that seems to be an argument for divine timelessness, being outside of time, having all of one's life at once, instead of just this present moment, which we are existing in now. Even the people listening to this recording in the future, they're living in their present moment, right? Whenever they're listening to it. So I think that this is a strong argument for divine timelessness. In God's case, however, I think that the incompleteness of temporal life is diminished somewhat by his omniscience. So for an eternal, omniscient being, he knows the future with all the detail, and he knows the present and past with the same detail. He knows everything, right? He's omniscient. He knows exactly what happened in the past. He knows exactly what happened in the future. He recalls the past in perfect detail, unlike us. Right? So when we're thinking about the past or something that happened to us, we have to sort of think about it. Sometimes we're not even confident that that's actually what happened. We might think, am I making this up? God is not like that. He knows exactly what happened in every detail because he's omniscient. Right? And so if we think about God's omniscience, this sort of lessens the argument. We can say that it's not really an incomplete life because God, he was able to recall everything, right? He can live that moment as if he was there. Nevertheless, I think that this is a good argument, and so we've got to admit that it has some force and could motivate a doctrine of divine timelessness, unless there are arguments for divine temporality that are even more powerful and outweigh it. And so again, this distinction is we're looking at arguments for God's being timeless right now. And so the argument that we saw was that it seems very incomplete to just live in the present moment. So if God, he's a most perfect being, he must have all of his life at once. And so this is an argument for divine timelessness. And so now we'll turn to some arguments for divine temporality. And temporality just means to exist within time. Timelessness is to exist outside of time. And these topics are not easy to think about, not easy to talk about. If you have questions as we're going along, feel free to stop me and ask if you're having trouble with a distinction that I'm making or a term that I'm using. So let's now turn to the arguments for God's being in time. It seems to me that there are two especially powerful arguments for thinking that God is temporal and does not exist outside of time. He exists within time. The first argument is God's changing relations with the world. God's changing relations with the world. The first would be based on God's changing relations with the world. God changes in his relationships with things in the universe, in the temporal world. Here it is important to distinguish between what we might call intrinsic change and extrinsic change. These terms are difficult to say out loud, it turns out. What is that?
It looks like a huge mosquito,
That is disgusting.
Got it. I was pushing it.
Killed a mosquito. I might have just...
He's out of time.
No, he's dead. He's dead. So going back, we need to distinguish between intrinsic change and extrinsic change. Something changes intrinsically if it changes in one of its non-relational properties, a property that it has in and of itself. For example, I can't.
No, because Josh is out of town. I got bit by a spider. So you need to definitely wash it.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm putting hand sanitizer on my hands because I just killed a mosquito. All right, so back to intrinsic versus extrinsic change. So something changes intrinsically if it changes in one of its non-relational properties. What this means basically is that, so say for instance we have a red apple. So if the red apple turned to a green apple, that's an intrinsic change because it changed within the thing itself, right? The thing itself changed from green to red. Extrinsic change is when something outside of it changes. And then that basically updates the relation of that thing to that other thing. And so let me give another example for this. So who in here has dogs? Everyone has dogs, right? You know, and even Elvis gets what's called zoomies. Everyone heard of zoomies? Zoomies, okay. So I'm going to teach you something today. So zoomies is when a dog just runs around like crazy for no reason. They just run and run and run and run and run. It's only like a minute or two. And this is what's called zoomies. Pretty much every dog that I've had gets it at one point. Sam, one of our dogs, had it last night. He just started running around like crazy. Yeah, just all over the house. And it's like, what are you doing? So there's a point to this. So usually when this happens, with our dogs, we're like sitting on the couch or something and they're just running around like crazy. So we can think of it like this. So say that before having zoomies, Sam was to the left of me. Okay? And then after zoomies, he was to the right of me, right? He ran around, and now he's to the right of me. So we can think of extrinsic change in this way. So I underwent extrinsic change in my relationship to Sam. Because Sam was over there, now he's over there. So my relationship with Sam changed, even though I was just sitting on the couch, right? And so this is what's called extrinsic change. I changed in my relationship to him. I once stood in the relation to the right of Sam, because he was to the left of me, and then I stood in the relation to the left of Sam, because he was to the right of me, after zoomies, right? So this is how we can think of extrinsic change. So in creating the temporal world, the universe, God would seem to undergo extrinsic change, because now he has created the universe. And the world stands in a new relation with God. God stands in a new relation with it. The relation is causing the universe. He stands in this new relation to the universe, just like I stood in a new relation with Sam once he moved across the room. Right? It's not that God changed, it's that he created the universe and the universe changed. But what this entails is that God has a new relation. So he has changed extrinsically, right? Something outside of him changed. And so he has this extrinsic change. Similarly, he now has the relationship of coexisting with the universe, a property that he did not stand in prior to creation. Indeed, there was no moment prior to creation. So God would undergo, it would seem, these sort of extrinsic relational changes insofar as he is related to the temporal universe. That would be sufficient for being in time because he's changing, right? If you're changing, then you're in time. This is what we were talking about earlier, is that if you're still changing, if you're changing in these relational properties, you're in time. And let me give another example to help illustrate this. So imagine that there's a rock existing in outer space, just all by itself. It's not moving, it's not changing, it's just sitting there, just a rock in outer space. And then imagine that a meteor whizzes by the rock, and then another meteor whizzes by the rock. So even though the rock is not changing at all, it's just sitting there, it is changing in its extrinsic properties, right? This one meteor whizzed by, and then another meteor whizzed by. And so it changes in its relation to these other changing things. The rock, though changeless, it was just sitting there in outer space, would be clearly in time because it's undergoing extrinsic change. Since God is really related to the changing temporal world, the universe, God would undergo extrinsic change, and therefore he would be in time. And so this is one argument for divine temporality, that God exists within time because he's going through these changes with these temporal objects. And so that seems to, God is picking up these new properties, right? He's standing in these new relations with things in the universe. And so this seems to be suggestive of the fact that God exists within time. and his properties are changing. Yes.
But we're still assuming that timelessness and temporal cannot be one and the same. It has to be either or.
Right, and so
Because that
to go.
rock can be not in time, but the other rocks that's flying by it can be in time, but the rock that stands still can be out of time. So according to you, you can't have both.
Right, because the distinction that we're making between temporality and timelessness, they're mutually exclusive. So if you're temporal, then you're not timeless. And so it's like I was saying, it's A or not A. So I could say temporal on the one hand. Let me go ahead and write it down here. So temporal, not tempura, shrimp. Temporal, timelessness. So temporal, timelessness just means not temporal, and timelessness means, or temporal means not timeless. Does that make sense? So timeless means not temporal. Temporal means not timeless. And so these are mutually exclusive properties. You can't have both without contradiction.
See, I'm thinking heaven is timelessness.
Okay.
And wherever Moses, Elijah, and they are right now, time does not exist.
Okay.
But God can come out of that into our world of time.
Right.
So that's why I'm having a hard time saying
which one.
Either or.
Right.
He could be in heaven where there's no aging, there's nothing going on, but he can come out of it and experience what we experience at that present moment.
Temporality.
So it's hard to imagine it's either or. That's all I'm saying.
Right. Okay. No, I definitely agree there. Let's put that question off for a second, because we're going to cover what's called the A and B theories of time, which is not theological, but we're going to discover that depending on your theory of time, which is not theology, depending on your theory of time is how I think you're going to sit on either side. And so we'll get to that in a second. Getting back to what we were discussing, we were talking about this first argument, which is basically that God is changing extrinsically in his relation to these other things in the world, like the universe, right? We're changing all the time, and so he's changing in his relation to us. We're the things that are changing, and so his relation to us is changing. And so this seems to suggest that God is within time, because he's changing, his properties are changing. And let me just add this. The relational change in God becomes extremely difficult for timelessness when you think about the doctrine of the incarnation. Because in the incarnation, the second person of the Trinity takes on a human nature. He is now related to the human nature in a way that he was not before. Right? There's a change there. He was not related to the human nature as he was after he became incarnate. And so, these are issues that we've got to think through, right? We've got to think about, what does it mean when we say that God became incarnate in Jesus? And one way to talk about it is to say that God took on, he was related to the human nature at the moment when Jesus was born. And so this seems to suggest that there's a change there that happened, right? And extrinsically, he changed. And so this seems to say that there's time passing there. So the second argument for temporality is God's knowledge of tensed facts. God's knowledge of tensed facts. The second argument in favor of divine temporality would be based on God's knowledge of tensed facts. So what do I mean by tensed facts? By tensed facts, I mean facts that are related to the present, the past, present, and future. For example, that it is now, and I'm looking at my clock here, it's now 9:23. And that would be a tensed fact, right? And God would know it because he's omniscient. It was 9:22 a minute ago. That is a tensed fact. It will be 9:24 a minute from now. All of these would be tensed facts. An omniscient being, God, as an omniscient being, God must know all these facts. So if there are these facts about the world of which God is ignorant, then he could not be omniscient. Right? So if these are true, if these are facts, like it is now 9:23, if that is a fact, God must know it. But in order to know those things, God has to exist in time. So if there are tensed facts, then it seems to be that God would then have to know them because he is omniscient. He knows what time it is now, right? It's now 9:24. He knows that. But if God knows that it is now 9:24, he is obviously located at that moment in time to know that it is now 9:24. If he is located at 9:23, he'll know that it is 9:23. So that would be change going on constantly in God as these tensed facts change about time. Right? This would constantly be changing. God would constantly know what time it is. And that's the easiest way to understand this argument for temporality, is that God always knows what time it is. And that is always changing. And so that is one argument for temporality. So let me go ahead and skip down here. So far from being an imperfection in God, it seems to me that this kind of knowledge is a perfection in God, of knowing what time it is. And it seems so simple. It's in virtue of his omniscience that God knows what time it is. He is not frozen into immobility, but he keeps track of what is happening in the universe, right? And so therefore he knows what is going on now, like what time it is. That seems very, very obvious, that God knows what time it is, right? He knows what time it is. And so, but what we're going to see is that these arguments sort of fall back on your theory of time, and we're going to get into this right now. So how can we assess these arguments for divine temporality? It does seem to me that there is one escape for the defender of divine timelessness. These arguments both assume that there are tensed facts about the world, and tense just means, remember, facts about time, what is going on in the world at this present moment, the future. So these arguments assume that there are these facts. But what if there aren't these facts? What if these facts are not real? What if they don't exist? So these arguments assume that what's called temporal becoming is real. Temporal becoming just means that things really come into and go out of existence, right? Even me, if you think about me, temporal becoming means that there was a time when I came into being, right? I haven't existed forever. There was a time when I actually came into being, and then there's a time where if I die and I don't go to heaven, or if I just die, then that's the end of me, right? And so these temporal becoming is something that seems to be assumed here, is that there's things that are coming into and going out of existence along with these tensed facts. So whether you think there's these tensed facts or temporal becoming is real is going to depend on what theory of time that you adopt. And we're going to look at these very, very briefly. It's a little difficult to understand, but it's going to help us, I think, in understanding where we sort of fall. And this is what I'm doing today, is not trying to convince you what you should believe on this, just sort of expose you to the arguments for and against divine temporality, divine timelessness, and then you can go and think about it yourself and make up your own mind. So let's look at these two theories, the A and B theory of time. The B theory is a tenseless theory, and the A theory is a tensed theory. And so the tenseless theory we'll look at first. So according to the B theory of time, I'm going to write this up here. So A and B doesn't really stand for anything. It's just to help understand the distinction. It's not to say that there's something B about this theory of time. It's just to say that this is the B theory of time. The A theory. I'm going to draw some diagrams here. I'm not the best drawer in the world, but we'll get to that. So the B theory of time, the difference between past, present, and future is just an illusion. This is what the B theory holds, is that the difference between past, present, and future is an illusion. There is no difference, subjectively speaking, nor do things come into and go out of existence. That, again, is just an illusion of human beings. Rather, everything is in time is spread out like kind of a line. I'm going to draw a line here. So we have a line. This is all of existence. All of existence here. This is the B theory of time. This is for everyone. So this is the theory of time that we're looking at. So if this is your theory, life is spread out sort of like a line. Every point on the line exists equally. So I'm going to write a point here and say this is 2016. So this is the present moment for us. But let's say this is 1863. This time is equally real on this theory. Both of these times are equally real. So the people in 1863 think that it's now, just like we in 2016 think that now is real. But both of these, on B theory, both of these times are equally real.
So they're happening at the same time?
There is no different time. There's no there is, it's a tenseless theory. And so all of these moments in time are equally real. But what we perceive as time...
Each individual?
To each individual, right, but it's an illusion, is what this theory is saying. Is that because we are existing and we think that this is the present moment, this is all that exists is the present moment. That seems like obvious, right? But the B theory says that's just an illusion of human consciousness. That all moments, the past, the present, the future, all moments are equally real. This is what this theory entails.
That is the B theory.
So this is the B theory. Oh, it's not necessarily what they believe. There's Christians that believe this too.
Can you explain it again, this theory?
This theory. So let me just continue reading here. So there's this line here, and so we exist in 2016, right? And so, and what we did was, and that's an 8. You can't really tell my handwriting is horrible. But 1863, for the people living in that moment in 1863, they thought that was real. Right, they thought their moment was real in time, and so for us, we think that was the past, right? But on this theory, that time is equally real as the present moment, as it is in 2016. Both of these moments are real. Even so, if we went into the future, say to 5030, that would be as real as it is now in 2016. That's what this theory is saying: is that all moments in time are equally real. It's not that there's just this one moment, the present, that's real. It's that all moments in time are equally real. There is no distinction between past, present, and future. It's all real. Does that make sense?
So in other words, it's just no past and it's no future.
There's no past, present, future. Everything is now. Everything is equally real.
The theory.
That's the B theory of time.
So there was no George Washington, like right now. People would say George Washington didn't exist, Abraham Lincoln, none of that existed. Just now is existing.
No, they would say that they did exist, but their slice of time was equally real as it is now in the present moment. Well, see, that's the thing. That's the thing, is that there's Christians that fall on both sides of this. But we're going to look at some reasons to think that A theory is true, and we're going to get to A theory in a second. A theory is the commonsensical view, the view that most people believe. So, like I was saying, this class today is a little bit difficult. I mean, when you talk about time, it's very easy to just kind of glaze over and be like, what are we talking about?
I believe that everything was real at one point.
Well, it was real at one point, but that's consistent with A theory. So B theory is to say that past moment is equally real as it is now. It's not to say that it was real. It's to say that it is real.
It is real.
Right? And so that's it. But the passage, but the past, it's exactly.
Right now.
Exactly. It's real.
It is real.
Right. For us, it's just an illusion of human consciousness on this theory that it was real, that it was something that passed away. So temporal becoming, like I was saying, things that come into and go out of existence is an illusion. But let's move on. So on B theory, there is no temporal becoming. There are no tensed facts. Rather, for any point on the line that you pick, people at that point will think that time is now. But all of these are just subjective perspectives. It's just an illusion of human consciousness on this theory. So in the tenseless theory of time, it's very easy to think of God existing outside of time, if B theory is true. God doesn't change in his relationships to the universe. He's related to everything in time and space from the beginning to end in a tenseless way. And this is very difficult to comprehend, put it in your head. And so what you can do is just think about it. And like I was saying, we're not trying to convince you either way, but just to introduce these ideas to you. Right, and so it's going to take a little more thinking through these things before you are able to come to a definitive way of saying, yes, this is true, this is not true. So just to introduce you to these ideas. So what God would know on the tenseless theory is that Jesus was crucified in 33 AD. And Obama was elected in 2008. Those are the sort of facts that he would know. He wouldn't know it is now 9:33. Right, he wouldn't know because that's a tensed fact. He wouldn't know that. He would say at 9:23 or at 9:33 they were in Coffee and Theology discussing divine eternity. That's what he would know, and so he wouldn't know tense facts. So by contrast, and let's now look at the A theory of time, which is the commonsensical view. Moments that are past or moments that are future aren't real. They are purely potential. Instead of a solid line, think of a dotted line. And so we have a dotted line here. This is the present moment. This is the future. And so this is 2016, and this is all that is real, basically, on this theory, is it's the present moment that is real. The past has gone away. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. The future is just potential. It doesn't exist. It's not here yet. And this is the A theory of time. This is the commonsensical view that most people believe. Or just sort of go by, right? As we're walking through life, no one really thinks about these things. It's just sort of what you assume. So these moments in time, in the future and the past, aren't real. The past has gone away. The future has not yet come. So all that really exists is the present. The future is not real, but merely potential. On the A theory of time, God is causally related to the world. If God is causally related to the world, then he will undergo extrinsic change as the present moment changes. And so he knows, again, what time it is, if A theory is true. There are tensed facts about what time it is now, right? And this is because the present moment is all that exists. As it goes through time, as we're going through time, there are different tensed facts about what time it is, right? So now it's 9:35. Before we were talking about 9:23, 9:24, but these moments have gone by. And so what he knows now on A theory is that it is now 9:35. And so these moments change, and they're always changing. And so God would exist in time if A theory is true. So these arguments that we discussed earlier, I think, are going to depend on your theory of time that you accept.
But where does God fit into A theory because he knows our future?
What do you mean?
Where does God fit in A theory?
So God,
in and out of that,
so God would exist in the present moment just as we do.
But he knows our future in the A theory.
He knows the future, but it's not real yet. And again, this is just to say that
not real to who?
It's not
not
my
real to-
reality, but
it's
God.
not-
But it's
already
God's reality, right?
God is from the end to the beginning.
right. He would know that, but that isn't to say that it's real.
To
And
who? To us.
Right. Okay. So let me get to some theological objections, because there's reasons to think that it's not B theory that is true. It's A theory that is true, and these are theological reasons based on Christianity. And so what I was saying is that we must weigh the arguments for and against these if we were to say that God is either timeless or temporal. So let's look at some theological objections to the tenseless theory, to against B theory, that one can press. The argument goes that it weakens the doctrine of creation. On this view, the world is really co-eternal with God. There is no state of affairs where God exists without the universe, because there is no moment in time. Right, there was no first moment of the universe, and then God existed outside of or without the universe. God existed alone. There is no such thing on B theory, because everything exists all at once. And this is a little bit difficult to understand. But if we think about it, so if the universe began to exist, it began at a moment, right? And so if we think about think about if the universe did not exist. God would still exist, right? But on B theory, that's impossible, because there are no moments. There are no different moments. The universe is, in a sense, co-eternal with God. There is no state of affairs where God exists alone. And this seems to contrast a verse in Isaiah that says, "Who is with me? No one, nothing." Right? And so it seems that there was a time, in a sense, of where God existed without creation. And so this seems to suggest that B theory is not true. And here's another theological reason that one would want to say that B theory is not true. And that is that evil would never really be vanquished. And so this is to say that what you were saying earlier is that it's real, the future is real to God, the past is real to God. But what we must understand is that on Christianity, evil must be vanquished at one point. So you can't say that evil is still real to God once Jesus came and was crucified and did away with death, sin, and the grave, right? Evil was vanquished with what Jesus did on the cross. And so the B theory would say that Jesus is still on the cross, that evil still exists. Does that make sense? Because those moments in time in the past are still equally real. And that's what the B theory entails. But on Christianity, it seems that evil does not still exist because of what Jesus did on the cross. The crucifixion on B theory never passed away. At a later time slice, Jesus did rise from the dead, but the crucifixion never passes away on B theory. It is never over with on the tenseless theory of time, since all moments are equally real, like I was saying. But as Christians, we want to say that God abolishes evil, that evil does not exist after what Jesus did. Jesus does away with evil. It is vanquished or annihilated. But on B theory, that's impossible because evil still exists, in a sense.
On the B theory,
Yes.
is it saying that things are in the present tense? I guess that's what's confusing me. Is it saying that when you say it's happening now, is it the present tense? Everything is the present tense. Is that the B theory?
I mean, sort of. But what we want to remember is that B theory is saying that what we experience is just an illusion. We want to say that we exist in the present moment in 2016, but this is just an illusion of human consciousness. That 1863 is just as equally real. It's not to say that what we experience is real. It's to say that that's just an illusion of human consciousness. And so 1863...
What about this? So my father is still real? I mean,
Exactly.
Well, I do believe that he's still real.
In B theory, right, all of these moments are still real.
I do believe that he's still real, but I'm saying, like,
Right,
now.
but that would be consistent with A theory.
Okay.
Is that in A theory, we're in the present moment, but you're saying that you believe that your father is alive in this present moment.
In a different...
Right, in a different state.
Right.
Right, and so, but that would be consistent with A theory. B theory is to say that all moments are equally real. Does that make sense? So think about the line again. Any point that you pick on the line is going to be equally real on B theory.
I'm not understanding real. I'm associating real with happening now. So somebody in 1863 is happening now while I'm existing
Right.
in 2016.
Well, it's real.
It's all an illusion that's the past. And
But what you're saying is real is just an illusion of human consciousness on this theory. And this is the view that most cosmologists hold, is B theory. And there's reasons for that to motivate a B theory. Thomists or Catholics. A lot of Catholics believe it. And there's reasons for it. I don't want to get into all of it today because we're pretty much on overload. But let me, because I haven't offered a theory of what William Lane Craig, the teacher of this class, the guy that puts all this information together, I'm going to give you his theory of what his theory is.
I was just going to ask you who was the originator
of the B theory. There was a guy, I think it was as I was looking it up last night. There was a guy, I can't remember his name, but it was in the early 1900s. This guy was basically trying to argue for the distinction between A theory and B theory, but then he was arguing for A theory. And then people, once they saw that distinction, they were saying, well, I don't really agree with those arguments, but B theory seems pretty good, and so let's go for a B theory, if that makes sense. I don't remember his name, but it was just a distinction that was made. And once you look into it, I mean, there's a whole lot more there. Right. What I want to do is just provide a very, very brief overview. But the whole point is that I think that your doctrine of divine eternity is going to depend on what view of time that you hold. So if you're an A theorist, then you would hold that God exists within time. If you're a B theorist, then you could easily say that God exists outside of time because all moments are equally real. So this is what William Lane Craig, the teacher of this class, what he holds. He believed that outside of the universe, without the universe, or what's called sans the universe, without the universe, God existed timelessly. Sans the universe, without the universe. But since the moment of creation, God entered into time. And since the moment of creation, he's been in time. And again, this follows from his believing that A theory is true. And that these moments are what exists is the present. It's not that these past moments are equally real as the future as the present, but it's that we're passing through time. And so God entered into time at the moment of creation. But outside of the universe, he existed timelessly.
So then, how do we...
So real quick, one last thing. So he would hold that timelessness and temporality both are contingent properties of God. And if you were in class when we were talking about the difference between contingent and necessary, necessary is something that is true in all possible worlds. A contingent truth is true in some worlds, but not in others. And so what we want to say here is that God was timeless without the universe, but that is a contingent property of God. Once he entered into time, at the moment of creation, he became temporal. And so his property switched from timelessness to temporality.
Okay, so,
Go ahead.
so that if you believe, which I believe, or at least I think I do,
Okay.
that God is the only being that can step into time and step back out of time at his own will.
Right.
And so he's not limited, even in creation, he's not limited to time. That he can step in it and he can step out of it because he reigns over.
Okay.
That is over.
So let's think about this a little more. So what does it mean? So let's say that A theory is true, which it seems like most people in here, we want to say that A theory is true. This is the theory that I lean towards as well. So let's say that A theory is true. And so at the moment of creation, when God creates the universe, he enters into time, right? It seems like we're all agreed there. But then there's this question of, does God pull back out of time? But let's think about that. How is that possible? How can he pull out of time if A theory is true?
Can I just
But what is that?
Meaning
Yes.
Meaning because when he created time, it now exists, and so that is what we exist in. And so how could he step back out of that?
Right,
time
because it
spans the universe.
Because if what is it?
Eternity.
How does it work? Yeah.
Too. The world. This is going to come to an end. And,
Right.
And then I guess eternity is no.
Eternity just means to be without beginning and without end.
Right.
But that is consistent with either God's being timeless or temporal, right? God could exist in the infinite past. He could exist in the infinite future. So God could be eternal and temporal, or he could be eternal and timeless.
just remember, so we won't leave here confused, that this is theory. And I don't care what nobody says or whatever. I'm going to go back to the word.
Right.
Period. That's period.
Right.
Because the Bible, it was necessary from a legal standpoint that God could not just step into time. I mean, it was necessary for him to step into time from a legal standpoint, and that's why Jesus had to take on that, because he could not come into the earth realm illegally. So he had to step into time. But God is not bound by time. God is eternal. We know that God is infinite. God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Now, let me read this one scripture, and then I'm out of your head.
Okay.
Ecclesiastes 3:15, and there's another couple ones. It says, "That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been. And God requireth that which is past." And I think that kind of sums up, because whatever I'm sitting under, I always want to be able to tie it back to Scripture, period. I don't care, because we don't want to leave here confused, and we always want to know that this is theory. And so there is some truth in both of those theories. But God is eternal. He's not bound by time.
Right.
But for our sake, he entered into time. But he can access time and eternity. And then God is spirit. And then we are spirit having a human experience. So for us to legally operate in the earth realm, we are bound by time.
So just to go back to the beginning of class, when we talked about divine eternity, what we did, the first thing that we did, and the first thing we do for each of these attributes is look at Scripture.
Yes.
And so what we did was we looked at this.
Yeah.
We looked at.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and you missed the first one too.
Yeah.
And so you're missing missing both classes where we talked. Well, you missed both classes where we talked about the Scriptures.
Okay.
And so what we did was we looked at the Scriptures and said that God is eternal, which means without beginning and without end. But the Scriptures don't tell us which theory is true. They don't tell us whether God is temporal or timeless. So what we did today was we looked at arguments for and against temporality and then timelessness. And then we said that where you fall on those arguments is going to be based on your theory of time and whether you believe that A theory is true or B theory is true. And most people in here are saying that A theory is true, which would mean that you believe that God is a temporal being. And then the question is, can God just still jump in and out of time? And my question is, that seems to be almost nonsensical. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense when you think about it. If A theory is true, how can God jump in and out of time? Because he's already been in time. He already changed in his properties. He can't go back out of time.
I don't think he can't. I just don't understand why he would. Like, the universe was there, and then we're here, and he stepped into time. I don't see why he'd be like, "Oh, I'm in. Oh, I'm out. Oh, I'm in." Oh,
Well, also think about this. So if A theory is true, there are these tensed facts of the present moment, what the present moment is. Like right now, it's 9:49. And so if A theory is true, he has knowledge, since he's omniscient, of these tensed facts, like it is now 9:49. And so if that's a tensed fact, which it is on A theory, then God would know it, which requires that God is a temporal being. So he can't jump out of time, because he would need to know that. He would need to know that tensed fact.
When all this ends, universe ends, does he go back to?
Right. So God could annihilate the universe and go back to a state of just God existing. And in that sense, it would be timeless. God would be timeless, I think.
When I'm talking about God has the ability to be in time and then outside of time, I simply mean that he's not restricted to
He's not.
God can be whatever he needs to be without ever ceasing to be who he is. And so because of his godness, he can step into our time at 9:49, but he's not restricted by it because of his essence as God. Whereas we would be restricted because of our essence as spirit.
See, but what you're saying, it sounds like you're saying that a B theory is true,
No.
where each moment is real and God can jump into whatever moment he likes.
Well, I believe that God is infinite, and
Right.
so his ability to spit. So when we say past, present, future, for us that's restriction. For him, he spans past, present, future.
So it sounds like So it sounds like you're a B theorist. You would fall on a B theorist.
I'm a God theorist.
I agree that I'm a God theorist as well. But if A theory is true, then what exists is the present moment. And so there is no possibility of jumping into a past moment because that's already gone. That's gone and over. The only thing that exists on A theory is the present moment.
Why would
so
God
what
jump
God
into
can
the past moment?
so the only place that God could jump into is the present moment.
He's everywhere.
He's ever present.
Yeah, he's got the beginning. What you're saying is he's got the beginning, he's got the end,
That's right.
all before him. But that seems to suggest that B theory is true. That all moments are real, and he can jump into whatever time he wants. But if you're an A theorist,
That's what I feel like.
exactly. But if you're an A theorist, then you would believe that he's always in
A
time.
was or shall be.
Right.
He always is.
He's always
And so
is.
it
Right. So we're out of time. We're
You're funny. That was
Right.
good.
right. I used the joke last time too. But my whole point here today was just to introduce these ideas to you, because it's not like we're going to sit here and discover what we think is true in this class, right? Some of you might even just like, what were we even talking about today? But so it's all of this stuff. Yes, it is. It's theology, and all of this stuff opens up a lot of interesting questions. And again, this is an opportunity for us to love God with all of our mind, and to devote our minds to thinking about God. And it is mind expanding, right? As we think on these issues, we grow in knowledge, we grow in understanding, and this is a way to love God with our mind. And so that's what we want to do today, is not to say that we're, I don't know. So you get what I'm saying. We just want to learn more. We want to grow in understanding and love God with all of our mind. So let me close out in prayer. God, we thank you for today, the present moment. We thank you for the past moments and the future moments. We also thank you that wherever you exist in time, or whatever theory is true of time, we thank you for it. And we thank you for everything that you've taught us, everything that we're able to go over in class, everything that we're learning. We thank you for all of this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
It's an exercise of the mind.
Oh, yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
I'm saying,